Stories of Being is a series of conversations with a range of inspiring humans whose approaches to life each offer an important piece of the puzzle for how we go about creating the fairer, more balanced, connected, and beautiful world we long for. Each conversation explores a new perspective on how we view success, connection, power, and progress, and offers inspiration and guidance as we collectively transition to more harmonious ways of being with ourselves, each other, and our shared home. In today's episode, I talk with Nim De Swardt. Nim is a woman who works on a variety of amazing projects and wears many different hats. But what she identifies with first and foremost is being a human. She has a passion for exploring and understanding and living the full spectrum of the human experience, and is a deeply passionate advocate for connection. She is also an intrapreneur turned social entrepreneur, writer, speaker, advisor, storyteller, and explorer of connection. In this episode, we chat all things connection and how it can help solve some of the problems we face, co-generational relationships and the lost relationship of elders within our society, death and what living well and dying well means, and so much more. Nim is one of those people that you just instantly feel at home with, I guess you could say. And I loved this conversation. It's humanness, I guess. Nim has an amazing bunch of projects going on at the moment, including her Reconnect cards, plus a whole bunch of other things. So check out the show notes because I've linked to her website, the Reconnect cards, the Human Atlas project, which she also works on, which is an exclusive newsletter where she presses the courage button, as she says, and puts her writing out there. So please enjoy. She's awesome, she's lovely, and as always, hopefully you get something out of this. So you're someone who works on a variety of different projects and could kind of define yourself by many different titles, for lack of a better term. But why is being a human and the title of human the most important thing for you?
Well, I feel like I've always been a lifelong explorer of the human condition. And from a very early age, I was just a very curious observer of humans. I was a child of the 80s in the pre-doom scrolling ages. And I grew up in a very small community in far north Queensland. And so the power of community was abundant. And so my curiosity, I guess, started very early, and I was really captivated by how humans connect, collaborate, and communicate. And the title of human is so important to me because we all are the same on the inside. And, who are you outside of these self-imposed titles? And this is a question that I've really had to learn the hard way, during some of the greatest, I guess, ego shedding moments of my professional life. I believe that our identities are always evolving, but I identify with human because it feels truthful and long lasting. And, it's a title that not only connects to me personally, but also really professionally, because all of my work pursuits have this human connection thread through them.
Amazing. And you kind of touched on a couple of things there, like the ego shedding and growing up in this place where there was a really strong sense of community. Are those some of the things, and what other things kind of that have happened up until this point? What are the memorable moments or experiences do you think that kind of led you to this place of being human first and letting go of kind of everything else in terms of title and achievement and all of those sorts of things?
Well, it's been quite the journey, and it's definitely a lifelong sport. But when you asked me that question, I first thought of, the camera, because I did a degree in photography, and, I'm one of these people that does a degree and then never uses it. But my camera was kind of my original wand for human connection. And it was in these moments when I was a photographer that I was able to witness my own gifts of being able to connect with the human behind the lens. And like it came very naturally to me. And, you know, no one likes getting their picture taken. I don't like getting my picture taken. But I had this ability to make this human or humans feel safe and seen and relaxed and open. And, you know, I think that experience as a photographer, you know, it was my original wand for human connection. And, you know, now I just take photos for loved ones and for the love of it, and to be a non-influential Instagrammer.
Rare these days.
Yeah. And I guess the other reflection is that like I thrive in conditions of diversity and differences. And, you know, travel has always been such a main vein for my hyper curiosity. But you know, I love being the black sheep, so to speak. And, you know, I like being surrounded by people and cultures and experiences that don't feel familiar. And I also love being that bridge of diversity and differences and gathering people of diversity and differences together.
And is that something that kind of or that feeling of liking being the black sheep and that bridge, is that something you always, on reflection, always felt and enjoyed, or is that something that's kind of unraveled over time?
No, I think it's been such an integral part of my kind of psychological makeup, in terms of like my infectious curiosity, my kind of investigator mindset. You know, I think one of the greatest lessons that I've learned and continue to learn is like, you know, I've always had like endless time and empathy and patience for our elders. And when I say elders, it's, you know, it's basically anyone over 50 years old or self-identifies as a modern elder. And so I've spent a lot of my life actually surrounded by people of different ages, both younger and elder. But some of the most profound experiences in my life and my greatest lessons has actually been gifted through this kind of age diversity theme that has been so integral to my upbringing, and also my professional and personal life.
Yeah, so on that kind of co-generational connection is something I guess you're quite aligned with, and you really see the power in that. And I feel like that first happened for you in a corporate workspace. Is that correct? Where you started sort of seeing the power of this generational connection. Did that first happen in like a corporate setting? And as a society, do you think that we're really lacking this kind of diversity across generations and age? Because it's not something we talk about diversity a lot, you know, in this day and age, which is amazing. But the age diversity isn't something that's necessarily spoken about.
Oh, I could talk to you about this for the next hour, but I'll keep it brief. So the first part I'll start with is just my personal story and how that influenced my really strong beliefs around this area. And then I'll talk more about why it's so important. So yes, like, you know, one of my core life philosophies is this concept called win-win relationships. And it's really about no matter our age, we all have something to teach and learn from each other. And just for me personally, like when I was 30, I was the youngest direct report to a 70-year-old CEO, and his name was Mike Dolan. And together we created you know, an intrapreneurship program that, you know, operated across 20 countries and 6,500 employees. And, you know, it was phenomenal project that was, written about by global press and very celebrated. But fundamentally, together, we were such a dream co-generational team. And it was a chapter that really, really cemented the power and the passion I have for this intergenerational collaboration. And, Mike was a very experienced CEO, and he came with just infectious curiosity and wisdom, and combined with my kind of my dynamic energy and curiosity for innovation and doing things differently. We were so disruptive in our approach. And I think that this, out of all of my professional experiences, I was living in real time what I believed, which was this notion of these win-win relationships. And why I think this is so important is because, we are living in the most age diverse time in human history. And we really need to make the most of this multi-generational moment. And fuck all you generational shaming, blaming, and stereotyping, because fundamentally we are all the same, no matter what our age is. We all have something to teach and learn from each other. And I really believe that our current world can learn a lot from what Native and Indigenous cultures do when it comes to respecting elders and celebrating elder wisdom and intergenerational wisdom sharing. And, I've taught workshops across the world on intergenerational wisdom sharing because there is a lack of transmission of sharing our stories and our lived life experiences across the ages. Secondly, we are living in the most age segregated societies and cultures of our time. And ageism is not new news. And no matter what age you are, whether you're 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, everyone will experience ageism at some point in their life. And so, this is, I'm very, obviously you can hear it in my voice. I'm really passionate about elevating and celebrating intergenerational wisdom sharing. And I think that there is such power in our stories. And I feel that our stories are our greatest passport to connection. And that's where a lot of my work focus is around stories as connection. And I guess, why is this important? Well, our relational health is the number one important factor when it comes to longevity. Everyone talks about mental health, but they never talk about actually the benefit of social connections in that mental health kind of arena. We get higher quality of life, a greater sense of belonging from our social interactions and our social connections.
I really want to come back to that, but just quickly, while we're on the elders and kind of this ageism, I guess, that we currently are seeing, why do you think that's happening? The thing that kind of pops into my mind is we live in a world where it's all about generalization, but it's all about kind of growth and productivity. So in my head, I was thinking, is it because as people get older, they're not seen as productive, or they don't have the same output, say, as a younger person? Yeah, why do you think that there's this kind of almost lack of respect or loss of importance with age, and why there's that gap?
So a couple of things that come to my mind when you ask that question. And, these may not be scientifically proven, but these are certainly my beliefs around why this is happening. The first is that we live in a very individualistic culture. And, if the listeners have ever read this book by David Brooks called The Second Mountain, he really, I love David Brooks. He's a New York Times columnist, and everything he writes just speaks to my heart and soul. But, he talks about this, how this individualistic culture is driving us to focus more on self than others. I think historically, younger age has always been celebrated, but there is a very exciting wave that's happening at the moment. And that is where, age diversity and all ages are celebrated more. And, we see this in the media all the time. I obviously see it because I follow it. But for example, recently, the Philippines' oldest woman was featured on the cover of Vogue. Beautiful, captivating, very, just such an image with such emotions. The detail in her skin, the stories in her eyes. So, it is entering mainstream media. And you see this also, in Hollywood, right, where there's all ages that are being celebrated for doing things that maybe were once only celebrated by younger generations. And I think the media actually plays a critical role because, we are so influenced by the media, and there is a lot of kind of generational shaming and blaming, which I mentioned before. And so, we have these stereotypes and these narratives that are constantly being driven, like, oh, the millennials, the me generation, the spoiled generation, oh, the boomer, okay, boomer. Like, it's these types of narratives they're stereotyping millions of people by, one kind of perception. And the last thing I'll say, which I find is really important, is that the way we gather in communities has radically changed. And so traditionally, we would gather at places like church and, a lot of these historical gathering places in community, Rotary, RSL clubs, churches, community halls, neighborhood centers, all of these places are no longer attracting new generations, and it's a sign of the age segregation that's happening in our community. And obviously there is a lot of technological influences on this, screen time and how many people are addicted to screens. And, we're living in the most hyper-connected society of our time, but we are fundamentally the loneliness generation and people that has ever existed. Everyone is longing for belonging. And I guess no matter what age you are, it's very common for people to surround themselves by people that feel familiar. And so, if you're in your 30 somethings, you're hanging around other 30 somethings. If you're in your 60 somethings, you're hanging around other 60 somethings. So there is not a lot of moments in our communities that enable us to really cross-generationally pollinate.
Yeah, we're not just in community. It's that really carved out time to be social rather than just being with everyone. And like you said, that's where we get a variety of different people that we're exposed to.
Yeah, it's, the social tapestry of our communities is it's radically changed. And, I think that there's a real post-pandemic shift towards the value of social connections. But there isn't a lot of opportunities for people to actually experience that. And so I think when it comes to age diversity, unless you're in a workplace where you automatically get different ages, there isn't a lot of actual opportunities for people to access that multi-generational moment. One of the reasons why I have always volunteered is because it gives me exposure to all ages. When I was a surf lifesaver volunteering on the beach, my surf lifesaving team was ages 18 to 65. They're real multi-generational moments through volunteering. The other thing that I find interesting that's happening in the US, and we'll see happening more in Australia soon, is this multi-generational living. And because of the housing crisis and the barriers to entry for some of the younger generations, there is a huge, huge wave of innovation happening in the US at the moment around multi-generational living. And, I read these stories of these win-win relationships where, like, there's this 20-something-year-old living with this 70-something-year-old. And, there's a win-win from it, because the 70-something-year-old is getting so much, I guess, social exposure and curiosity ignited through the younger, and the younger is getting, reduced or lower cost rent, and also just the ongoing wisdom that the 70-something-year-old offers.
Yes, and that connection between generations also creates, or has the potential to create, less division, because it's understanding and connection on a human level. So there's not this divide between, I will use the environment as an example, like we always say, or the common theme can sometimes be, the boomers don't care, it's up to our generation to fix it, and all of these things. So there's almost this divide, potentially because there's not conversations between the two groups and relationships between the two where they can actually discuss it and understand where each is coming from. And that's obviously across a variety of different topics, but it's that lack of relationship that can sometimes create those sorts of divides.
100%. Yeah. I think when I listen to you speak on this, it reminds me of this quote that I heard Kristen Tippett say the other day from the On Being podcast, which is like one of my favorite podcasts. And I think that what you're saying is like one of our greatest opportunities. And that is like, when it comes to the greatest challenges of our time, like climate change, there is no way that we can work against each other as generations. Like it needs to be a collaborative approach. And, I live and breathe this every day. Like one of my companies, Tomorrow's Air, is, it's in the climate space. And I co-founded it with a woman in San Francisco, Christina Beckman, and she is from a completely different age group than me. So there is such opportunity, but we just have, I don't know, I feel like so many of us have so many walls up in place when it comes to collaborating with different generations. And, if anyone has experienced having a great mentor or being a mentee, or, those types of dynamics, they can actually be win-win moments and opportunities, but it does take two people or two sides to lay down that armor. And a lot of the time that armor is just, media and cultural conditioning, and be open to the possibilities that exist. And like, I am a living, proving case point of what happens when you lay down your armor to open up more co-generational collaborations, conversations, and partnerships in your life. Because I live and breathe it every day. And it's like one of the most rewarding things about my existence is, the different generations that I work with and partner with. And even personally, I have a personal board of directors that are over 50, and I swear to God, like no Instagram quote can give me the wisdom and life advice that I need. I go to, my personal board of directors, and their lived life experiences and their ability to share story and wisdom with me, that is so much more powerful than any freaking Instagram quote card could ever give me.
Amazing. So those personal board of directors, are they almost like your elders?
Yeah, they are my my modern elders. That's a term that Chip Conley, he's an American author and strategic advisor to the Airbnb founders and a hospitality entrepreneur. And so he founded this place in Mexico called the Modern Elder Academy. It's a midlife wisdom school. And I've spent many months over there working alongside the team, teaching as guest faculty. And the intergenerational piece plays a very important role in their curriculum. And, Chip has been, he continues to be an incredible mentor to me. But he's also he's very tuned in to what's happening when it comes to aging and longevity conversations. And, it's scientifically proven that if you have more, age diversity in your life, it will help with when it comes to your quality of life and your longevity.
Yeah. And I think as well, by having those relationships and including or society embracing the aging and the elder, the decisions we would make for society as a whole and for the environment and all of those things would be completely different, because we're taking that community and that group of people, what's the word, quality of life, but also their thoughts and advice into account, if that makes sense. It's kind of that, I think it's the seven generation principle of, how does this affect seven generations before and after? So the elders within our community actually having a fundamental say changes then what decisions we make on a bigger scale and level.
100%. And I think, I just want to comment, like, advice is a hard word, because I feel that language really matters when we talk about these types of things. And, wisdom is a word that's really important to me. And wisdom, you don't have to be over 50 to have wisdom. All ages can have wisdom. But where I feel like it really comes to life for me personally is not through their advice, so to speak, but through their lived life experiences, and giving them the permission through powerful questions to hold the space to listen. And I think fundamentally, no matter what age you are, we've really forgotten this lost art of listening. And, so it's, no matter if you're the elder or you're the younger or you're the in between, whatever, it comes down to some really kind of fundamentally human things that we need to remind ourselves first before we go into these conversations or collaborations or partnerships. But what I do see in my work and in my personal life is, especially with the modern elders, is, they are at a stage of their life where they have more time, they have generosity, they have lived life experience, they have wisdom. They are fully equipped to be extremely generous to future generations. And if the youngers had more time, more ability to listen, and more curiosity, there could be potential magic that happens there. I call it intergenerational magic. But I guess, I think it starts with being open to finding, new conversations and new partnerships. And, practically in my day-to-day, I do this every day. Yesterday I bumped into a maybe 50, 60 something year old woman outside my apartment block. I sparked up a conversation with her. My AirPods weren't in. I wasn't on my mission listening to my podcast. Like, we are just so disconnected from, being curious to connect with other ages. But there is so much beauty and joy that unfolds when you open up those portals of curiosity.
It's initially making a conscious effort to connect, because it's not necessarily how we live anymore, because we can always be listening to something on our phone, whatever it is. So that's the habit and the learned behavior. It's almost changing the kind of the way we behave. And I think the thing you're working on, the reconnect cards, is a really nice way to kind of shift that thinking. So I'd love for you to kind of chat to that and talk about your journey with launching these cards, and how they can kind of bring us back to feeling more connected to each other.
Well, Ingrid, if you ever want to develop a product, know that it's a long burn project. After working in like more service-based businesses my entire life, this is my first product, and it's definitely been a long burn. But Reconnect was conversation cards for deeper connections, and it was born in the thick of COVID, with a friend of mine, Nick. You know, we grew up together in Port Douglas, and we really witnessed growing up the power of community and connection. But during the thick of COVID, we saw how, you know, there was just this overwhelming longing for belonging. And, you know, we've fundamentally forgotten how to connect with each other as humans. And, you know, I think with Reconnect, it's actually really simple. It comes down to, if you give people the permission to listen and create the right permission slip, it's essentially a permission slip to share stories and listen. And, you know, you can have deeper conversations through something as simple as powerful questions and the permission slip to listen. And, you know, we have been testing the product all around the world. And I am a human that feels things deeply. And it has been absolutely profound to witness how something so simple as, you know, conversation cards can have such a profound impact on people, you know, when they're paired off and using Reconnect. You know, it's a reminder of humanity, essentially. And yeah, I guess where we can play it with friends, we can play it with strangers. And it's a very simple and accessible tool. You know, a lot of the time we don't have time, we don't have space, life is busy, there's 4,000 notifications and 20,000 emails waiting for me, and I'm dealing with 3 hungry mouths, you know, like whatever that is for you individually. But it can be something so simple yet so powerful. And so, yeah, we're launching Reconnect this year. It's been a wild ride, and I'm currently working with the second manufacturer. And, you know, I really believe in its power and potential. And we're going to continue doing these Reconnect workshops in community, because fundamentally, you know, when you're building a business, you know, my background is in social impact and innovation. And so, you know, we're not just wanting to create a mass produced product here. We're actually wanting to try change and massage that social tapestry of our communities. And so the workshops that we do with this game is also as equally important, because it gives us an opportunity to regather in community in unique ways that are different from how we're currently gathering, which is very different. Yeah, so watch this space, basically, is what I'm saying on Reconnect. And yeah, it's what the world needs right now.
You sort of touched on it, but it's seemingly simple. It's listening to people, but that is so powerful and something that doesn't necessarily happen. And I think something like those cards, or what those cards can also do, is people don't, I'm very guilty of this and I'm trying to be better at it, but people just want to be heard. They don't want to be told, you know, have their problems fixed, or, you know, told what to do or anything. They just want to be heard and seen. And these cards feel like they can also aid in that. It's just people being almost witnessed and stories being shared. And yeah, there's real power in that. And yeah, like you said, it doesn't happen necessarily naturally day to day.
Yeah, and it's usually because of these, right? Yeah, you know, I've always been on a grand search for stories, and, you know, I think I mentioned before, but they're like the connective tissue that makes up this beautiful tapestry of what it means to be human. And, you know, previously, like, I've been working as a life historian for many years. And as a life historian, my role was, I was capturing and collecting life stories of over 50s for future generations to treasure. And, you know, I'm a storyteller, I'm a story hunter, I'm a story keeper, I'm all of these things. But fundamentally, it's because I love to listen. I love to hold space, and I love to make humans feel seen and heard. And it doesn't feel hard to me. It feels very natural. and it is the greatest gift that I can give other humans in my lifetime. And so, you know, my work as a life historian really ignited this radical mission that I'm on to help humans connect. And that can be connecting through with themselves, through, you know, reflective practices, through nature, through community, whatever that means, and each other. You know, as you can see, I like totally nerd out on all things, you know, relational health, social connection, modern elder wisdom, narrative psychology. But really, it's about the power of sharing those stories. And yeah, Reconnect is just a tool to help do that, because when I was working as a life historian, it was a one-to-one service. And so it was very intimate, but it also, you know, the impact was restricted to the loved ones of the individual only. And so I was looking for a tool that could make this type of feelings and work possible to the wider community and society. And that's why Reconnect was born.
And I love that they can be used across a variety of different relationships, like a couple, a family, friends, strangers. So it's sort of, they sort of as well break the ice in a way and just make those conversations accessible, because you use cards and you know, so it makes it that connection, yeah, possible and accessible.
It's 100, and it's, you know, it's, I'm not going on Shark Tank to say that this is like the most innovative product out, because, you know, there is some really great competitors that already exist. You know, Esther Perel's card game that she launched during COVID, the We Are Not Really Strangers card game. There are conversational card games out there. But what I feel like that makes Reconnect so different, and what we're really committed to, is actually the social impact piece. And so we are building this business to help commit a percentage of all card games, all card decks sold to these workshops that are actually making an impact in our community. And so, you know, both Nick and I come from a social impact and innovation background. And so we're creating not only a business here, we are actually creating something that fundamentally is going to have an impact on that social tapestry that exists in our community. And that's most important to us. It's not about selling millions of decks. It's actually about the impact that it can have on a fundamental human level within our communities.
And I think you just said then, yeah, you know, you're not going to go on Shark Tank because it's not this hugely innovative thing. But I actually think the simplicity is actually so powerful, and it's actually what we need. There's all of these like crazy technological innovations, and yes, of course, they're helpful and we need some of them. But I think we also forget that there is so much power in this sort of simple, it's not simple, but more pared back solution. And that is actually what will change the world. You know, if we start relating to each other as humans, not race, not political party, not age, none, you know, any of these things, there is so much power in that. And from that, the world changes. If we relate to each other as humans, the world is a completely different place.
100% agree with you, Ingrid. And, you know, some of the most simple things in life are simply the most powerful. And sometimes as humans, it takes bad things that happen to us to make us realize that. And you're exactly right. Like, I feel like, you know, we could create the school of how to be human, and it would be the most popular school, the most popular school, because we've fundamentally forgotten how to be human with each other. And, you know, there is, you know, we're not going to go into the darkness, but, you know, we're living in the most disconnected moments of history right now. And, you know, I've really found such great light in these cross-generational friendships and relationships. And, they've always been at the heart of my conversations because I feel like it's a key aspect of what it means to be human and how we want to live and who we want to be to each other. And that's why, you know, it's really important for me, like, how might we live better and together in our communities? I mean, like, my friends laugh. I've got more 50-plus-year-old friends than any 30 something, and I'm proud of it. I'm extremely proud of it. And it's, yeah, I'm always, I'm always going to be advocating for the power of our lived life experiences as a passport to connection.
Yeah. And kind of on that, you mentioned before that storytelling is hugely important and powerful in kind of regaining that connection. And one of your projects is the Human Atlas Project.
Yeah.
So how do you kind of view that, and why do you see that as this like really powerful and important piece of this whole kind of puzzle?
Well, that question that sometimes people ask, like, what would you do if you were not afraid?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Well, if you ask yourself that 10 times every day during a sabbatical when you're having a career crisis, then you birth a project that is what you would do if you were not afraid. Yeah, so the Human Atlas is a private newsletter and community space that I run. And honestly, some days I feel afraid of its potential, and I just hit the courage button in this rainbow library and I write my little heart out. And for years, I was so nervous about the power of my writing, and I played small in so many ways. I just did what I should do in life, like the shoulds. I did all the shoulds. And then, I took a sabbatical for 3 months last year. It was my third career break. I'm a huge advocate of a sabbatical, whatever career break you want to take. And I started to write publicly for the first time in over 8 years. I'd been writing privately, and I guess the Human Atlas is really based on a couple of things. It's based on what I mentioned before around stories being our greatest passport for connection. It's also based on I just nerd out on narrative psychology. And I know that there's great power in sharing our stories. And this is a private space on the internet that's not on social media. I'm obsessed with Substack and its potential as a platform. I invested in Substack last week. I'm so invested as Substack as a safe and innovative place for writers. On the Human Atlas, we ask deep questions. We have honest conversations. And I do this because I seek truth and connection and direction and confirmation of the universal human experience. Mm-hmm. And there is so many peaks and pits of being human. There's these juxtapositions of what it means to be a modern day human. There's life and death. There's joy and suffering. There's the heartbreak and the redemption. There's the love and the loss. And I am just the biggest word nerd. And I know that we need these stories to heal and to express our truths and to enact this change. And so I have this community of explorers, and the explorers are the readers and contributors of this Human Atlas. And I don't know, it's been a very revealing and still scary journey for me, because it's basically, it wasn't just me hitting my courage button during a sabbatical. It's really me claiming my dreams. Reading has always been my inhale, and writing has always been my exhale. And when I write, it just feels like this delicious exhalation. And I just know that honesty connects. And, the Human Atlas is just my channel for that exhalation as I embark on these self-discovery journeys, as well as, you know, investigating others. So yeah, it's an amazing project, but you know, I'm still scared of it because it's a really stretchy courage muscle project. Yeah.
And how do you, I mean, you're doing it, so that's, you know, that's a big thing. But when that sort of fear, I don't know if it pops up or if it's always kind of underlying and in the background, but how do you move past that and keep going and not let that override the doing of it?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things. Naturally, in a private newsletter, you're going to have your, you know, your number one fans, and so, you know, I have some incredible Nim champions that encourage me to continue writing when, you know, it feels very vulnerable and dark, and I've got these vulnerability hangovers every time I press send. I think there's also a higher kind of vision or mission that's drawing me, and that is, you know, I've been writing this book for 8 years. I know the world needs this book. The only way for the world to see that this book is being kind of created in the oven is by writing continuously. So it's like, it's just, you know, it's kind of like with the courage muscle, it's like working out, right? You just got to keep on having to go to the gym until you get to that level of being, you know, fit. So the courage muscle just needs to keep on going as a consistency thing there. And the last thing I'll say, which I haven't actually ever told anyone, but I have this folder on my Google Drive, and it's called the Brag Bank. And you know, every single time I've got a LinkedIn recommendation, you know, an Instagram DM, a message from a friend, anything, like it's a very random bank of screenshots of basically, you know, when people have been, you know, giving me kudos or confirming that I'm on the path, or you know, celebrating my gifts, reminding me of the value I have to give this world. And so whenever I'm having a really dark Debbie Downer day, I go into that brag bank and I just kind of flick through the screenshots and remind myself that, you know, there is a higher mission for what I'm doing. And, you know, my work and my life is first and foremost a portfolio of service. And, you know, if I don't feel that in real time, sometimes I need to go seek it out. And the brag bank has been a great way to remind myself in those moments of, you know, vulnerability to keep going and keep writing.
I love that. I think that is such an amazing tool, you know, because doubt and fear and uncertainty and just like, ooh, what am I doing? It's natural. So I don't know why, but I think it's probably, it seems that everyone experiences it. And it sort of comes back to what you were saying earlier about the almost the ebbs and flows of life. Yeah, you'll go through these periods of doubt or uncertainty. So having a tool like that, isn't it? It's an amazing just reminder of the why. Remembering why is so important.
We haven't gone there yet, Ingrid, but I'd love to go there because, you know, the closer that I get to death, the more vivid my life becomes. And, you know, the work that I'm doing at the moment through studying to be a death doula and working with a client who's embarking on their end of life chapter and essentially dying, and working very closely with her and her family, you know, there is nothing more potent to kind of help you step more fully into life than in embracing the certainty that is death. And, you know, my capacity to live and to love is just being further awakened as I continue to open my heart to death. And it is a very, very powerful elixir when it comes to how do I live more abundantly? How do I live more courageously? You know, when we spoke before about the simple things, like it's being surrounded by death, working in the death industry, working at end of life, and in those hugely human moments, it fully reminds me of how very few things matter and how much things matter.
Mm. And is that a common sentiment that you see with the people you work with and help kind of transition through death? Like, is that something that comes up a lot, or what are sort of some of the common themes that you see some of your clients experience during that process?
Well, that's a big question because I think that it's a very individual experience. But one thing I will say is that as a culture and society, we're in complete denial of death. And that's why I was so drawn to do this work. And so, most people have an avoidance mentality when it comes to talking about death, thinking about death, doing the death life admin that you need to do before death. We've become so sterilized by the death process. We see it in movies and culture. Death is defined as an endpoint. It's isolated. It's lonely. We need to do death differently. That's why I'm in the world of death, because I believe that we need to do it differently. And also, P.S., like there is a massive age wave coming and we have a growing population, and, Australia's 65 plus population is going to grow 50% in the next 20 years. Like every single millennial that's listening to this podcast, if you're a millennial, your parents are going to pass in the next 20 years. And so the baby boomers, whatever generational branding you want to give them, actually, there is going to be a huge wave of generational change happening in our culture and our societies in the next 20 years. And so if we don't start getting comfortable with death now, we're going to have to face it very awkwardly in the future. So when people are at that end of life chapter or transitioning into that end of life chapter, they have the avoidance or they embrace it. And I think my work as a death doula is really, really important, because the role of the death doula is primarily to provide that psychological and spiritual support for the patient and their loved ones. And it's a non-medical role, and it's a role. It is such an honorable role. You're a supportive presence and a space holder and a companion and a witness and an organizer. And a lot of people at that stage of life don't have much support. A lot of people want to die differently these days, and that is okay. And there is a huge amount of incredible innovation happening in the end of life and death space, which we could record 6 podcasts on if we had more time. But what I feel that I see when people are at that end stage of life is, there's one of my favorite books of all time is The 5 Regrets of the Dying by Bonnie Neal. Yeah. And it's fundamental human truths that we forget. I wish I didn't work so hard. I wish I had I can't remember them all off the top of my head, but I wish I had healed relationships. And I think that these kind of narratives that she's identified through working with her clients are very similar to what we hear nowadays as well. And the quality of our relationships is a very key end of life question, topic, element of review. And that's why it goes back to the point that I was saying earlier around social connection has proved to help us when it comes to longevity and quality of life. Um, yeah, so I guess on the death side of things, it's an honor to be in the space, and I think that it's really needed right now. And I think we have a lot to learn from other cultures as well on how to do death better. The Western way is not great. And for me, it also has that huge, intergenerational element. I've always worked with elders, and, it is my greatest life's privilege to not only capture their stories, but also to help them transition through, the most important chapter of their life, which is end of life.
Yeah. And as you were just talking, and you said, I was just thinking, we're born into the world connected. Often a baby's put straight on them. We're born into the world connected. We should leave the world connected. And the work that you do as a death doula and supporting that transition means that people and souls can leave connected to themselves, to their family, to their community, if then, things are done differently. And I think that helps the individual who's going through that process, but it then also helps the people around them.
Yeah, I feel really comfortable in emotional depth. I think I said to you before, I feel things so deeply. I'm extremely empathetic and sensitive, but grief has this way of breaking you wide open. And anyone that has experienced death will know that it changes everything. It puts a magnifying glass over your entire life. And, I guess it's a stage of many families or loved ones and patients' lives that is very isolating. It's very scary. It's lonely. There's a lot of unknowns. It can be terrifying. And for the role of a death doula, it's we're skilled communicators. We hear what is not being said, and we sit in that silence when it is really, really thick. And we're very keen observers, and we are holistically supporting the individual and their loved ones through a process that is so, so bewildering. And I guess, what a privilege to walk alongside them and to hold them and to love them. And, it gives me goosebumps just talking about it, because I feel like, we focus so much on how well we live and how we're going to live longer and how we're going to optimize and productize, but we have no focus on how well we die. And I think that is a really important, pondering question for us to ask, because it's not something we often think about until someone close to us is going through the dying and end of life process, that it's very revealing to us that the current systems and process may not match how we want to spend our final days.
I think that phrase you just said, how well we die, it's so beautiful and so powerful. I think that's really, it's really quite special, that sentiment. So what would you, again, it's so, so different for everyone, but with the experiences you've had, how does that process of death and that experience, how does that look compared to how it is now? What does kind of dying well, generally speaking, what would you say that looked like or felt like?
Yeah, so I guess the first thing I'll say is that we're underprepared and avoidant. And so there is like a level of planning that needs to go into your end of life plan. And, you know, whatever age you are, this is, you know, I've done my end of life plan, and I feel very comfortable that knowing, you know, what I want done with my body, what my funeral will be like. You know, we're conditioned to think that our funeral has to be everyone wearing black, standing around crying. I mean, there is some amazing innovation that's happening within the death industry at the moment, and funerals do not have to be what you've seen on TV. You know, ritual is going through a revolution when it comes to end of life. And so I guess the planning piece is the first piece. And, you know, that could be everything from legacy projects, which is like the work I was doing as a life historian, you know, capturing stories before it's too late. There is this very morbid but beautiful quote that I love. And it's the quote says, "Every time someone dies, a library burns." And everyone has that friend that has lost someone and they haven't captured their stories. And then they've just got this camera roll of photos, which is great. But there is nothing more powerful than hearing them tell this and share their stories. So I guess just to quickly summarize to you, the planning stage is really important. You know, what do you want your funeral to look like? What do you want done with your body? Obviously, there's a huge amount of admin when it comes to your possessions, your finances, your dependents, your pets. You know, there's so many important aspects of information and documents. And, you know, because we're so digital these days, I can tell you now that if you don't have these things and someone passes, it is a real nightmare when it comes to their digital footprint, their logins, their bank account details, their social media logins. Like, there is a digital ecosystem that doesn't just die when someone passes. You know, you need to be able to access all of those things. And if you don't have, you know, that planning and that pre-planning documents, you know, it's also key decisions like, you know, who is your medical agent in charge, and who makes decisions when you can't make decisions on yourself, and do you want to be resuscitated? And, you know, there's a lot of medical decisions that you should make prior to, you know, and not having these car park conversations where it's like a flustered family is in the car park, emotionally charged and grief ridden, trying to make a decision on Uncle Harry because Uncle Harry hadn't done any of his paperwork. It's like, you know, it's just do the pre-planning. And then I guess the second stage is just like the caring for the actual, the dying and the death process. Like, you don't have to die in hospital. You know, if you want to die at home, you can die at home. You know, there's a lot of different options in terms of, you know, what do you want your caregiving, companionship, you know, funeral, ritual, ceremony, like all of these things you can consider. And then, yeah, I guess like the third thing is like really the supporting after the death. And there is a lot of great new grief and bereavement support access points, but it's still such a taboo topic that we don't actually talk about it a lot or enough. And so there's a huge opportunity for us as a culture to be more open to talk about the fundamentally only thing we're all going to do, which is die. Let's not avoid it. Let's just have these tough human conversations. There is so many people that are navigating extreme grief with extreme life admin next level. Like, there is nothing more selfish that you can do than die and not have your planning in order, because honestly, you are setting your loved ones up for years and years and years of administrational hell. Like, it is just a nightmare to have to deal with that admin, especially if you're in the depths of grief. Like it's, and if we just stopped avoiding these conversations, and there's a very clear co-generational opportunity here of like, okay, if my generation's more open to talking about the harder things, then maybe I should help my parents or my grandparents, lead them to more openness around these types of topics. But to be honest, Ingrid, and you can quote me on this, like 10 years ago, the sex industry was so taboo, no one was talking it. And now everyone's a sexologist. Well, I can tell you now that like death tech is booming. And in the next 10 years, everyone is going to be working in there's going to be a lot of people working in the death industry, and it won't be as taboo as what it is now.
Which is, a very good thing. And then one last question for you. With your experiences with death, with connection, with everything that you've done, it's a big question, I guess, but what does leading and living a rich and meaningful life look like for you?
That to me looks like continuing to approach everything with humility and honesty and humanness, and embracing that full human experience. It also means celebrating those small things, and those small things could be a smile in the street, a good morning, those small moments of human connection that we sometimes forget. And the last thing I'll say on that is, I have had so many kind of ego shedding moments in my professional life. And, I know that my work and life is a beautiful blend. And the way that I approach it now is like a portfolio of service. And I think that, there is win-win opportunities that exist in my work and my personal life every day. And so there's that mutual exchange and that mutual benefit that I'll constantly be seeking, whether it's across the generations, whether it's across stories. There's so many kind of nodes to the places that I work across. But yeah, tying it back to how we started, a rich and meaningful life means being human and not being afraid of that full spectrum of what it means to be human.